Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor Jon V. Kofas has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon, and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this synoptic perspective on a video which I did some time ago on the impact of the totalitarian interwar era on the neoliberal era of the last 45 years. Um, the neoliberalism, first of all, as far as definition of what is neoliberalism, this is not to be confused with the classical philosophy of English thinker John Locke of the late 17th century, who is the father of Western liberalism. First of all, liberalism itself does not mean liberalism equals democracy. Democracy is an ancient Greek word which means rule by the people, consent of the people, ruling with the consent of the people, and sovereignty rests with the people. Liberalism does not mean that. It does not mean that sovereignty rests with the people. Um, so, liberalism was born in the 17th century, and it was born in the embryonic stage of the capitalist world economies. It was forming in Northwest Europe. This is right at the time coinciding with the English Glorious Revolution of 1688. And the idea of liberalism was the primacy of the individual and private property and the rights of the individual in this emerging bourgeois society in England. This John Locke and this philosophy of liberalism spread to the continent in the next century, in the 18th century, which is known as the Age of the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason. So what we have is liberalism really taking hold and finding expression, by the way, in the American Revolution, the War of Independence, as well as the French Revolution, which scholars collectively call the Atlantic revolutions, and then spreading to other countries and actually in Europe and actually around the world after that, those ideals of liberalism, of placing primacy on the individual. However, the question is which individual. John Locke himself was wealthy. He was a university professor, but he was an investor in the East India Company. He made a lot of money in various investments, including, by the way, the transatlantic slave trade indirectly. So what we have is individualism really pertains to the people who influence policy through their elected officials. At that time, it was adult males only, by the way. And there were obvious in the real world the restrictions of property qualifications insofar as in order to go to the level of to rise to the level of getting elected in the English Parliament and eventually in assemblies of elected assemblies in the 19th century, as Europe adopted neoliberal constitutions, you have to have money. You couldn't possibly, a peasant, some small farmer, some dock worker, some warehouse worker, or factory worker couldn't possibly rise to that level. So it was very clear from the very beginning that liberalism, forget neoliberalism for a second, liberalism was, in fact, a system representing bourgeois values and the new social order of the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, emerging, the upper middle class that represented the capitalist world order. Now, neoliberalism emerges as an ideology in the 1930s. Actually, the first colloquium, the first seminar that was held in Paris, an American intellectual, journalist, political scientist, theoretician, philosopher, Walter Lippmann, actually took a part in that. But the European thinkers, they didn't exactly agree. Neoliberalism on everything on neoliberalism, they should disagree. But neoliberalism comes out, I mean, 1938 was the year of Anschluss, Hitler's taking Austria and making it part of Germany. 1938 was a year after Japan seized Manchuria and renamed it Manchukuo, Imperial Japan, which was also heavily influenced by, it can be characterized, let me just put it that way, as fascist as well. And Mussolini was already in power. So you have already in power in Italy. So you have three countries, namely Japan, Italy, and Germany, the so-called Axis countries, which are fascist. Um, now, and totalitarian, by the way. Now, the other country that Western liberal scholars classify, put in that same category, I would not. I would caution against it unless you really study this. You you know, people have a tendency, the layman has a tendency to put everything together here, and that's because of the Cold War, by the way. And that is the other totalitarian regime that's usually put in the same category. It was, of course, Stalinist Russia. Joseph Stalin was no Boy Scout. He drifted far away from Vladimir Lenin's principles of how to um, proceed with communist Russia. That's another story. But the fear of Bolshevism and the dreading of the Keynesian model of economics of the 1930s, the New Deal. The best way to think of Keynesian economics is just think of the New Deal. But there were types of New Deal, Keynesian economic models all over the world, by the way, from Chile to Mexico to France and so forth. So you have this is the background under which neoliberalism comes. The neoliberalism was itself a reaction to Bolshevism and to Keynesian economics. So what neoliberalism is a model of political economy based on the classical liberal model of Adam Smith's laissez-faire economics, except that it's not laissez-faire. It calls for a very strong state structure which buttresses, that is, supports, it becomes the pillar of the capitalist sector, which is in perpetual crisis and without the support of the state would collapse. And John Maynard Keynes, the great English economist, based his whole theory of Keynesian economics on that assumption because it was true. There was the Great Depression in the 1930s when this meeting, the first meeting of neoliberals, took place in Paris. There was another one in 1947, I believe in Switzerland. The second one was in Switzerland. This was much more advantageous for neoliberal thinkers, economists, and so forth, because the Cold War was emerging. 1947, by the way, was the year that we have the Truman Doctrine. President Harry Truman promulgated the doctrine dividing the world and asserting that the U.S.-based Western order was to engage in a struggle against the communist regime in the Soviet Union. And it's the embryonic Eastern Bloc back then. Neoliberalism really comes to fruition in the 1970s. The US imposes an experiment on Chile after the CIA overthrew Salvador Allende, the duly elected president of Chile, and helped to install a military junta with General Augusto Pinochet. It, Chile becomes an experiment for neoliberals. They impose neoliberal policies of deregulation, privatization, corporate subsidies, free trade, lowering tariffs, lowering taxes on the rich and on corporations, reducing public spending for social welfare, for the social welfare state and the safety net, the social safety net. By the late 1970s, this was tried in the mid 1970s with in Chile. By 79, Margaret Thatcher wins office in England, and she institutionalizes neoliberalism. And a couple of years later, Reagan wins in the U.S., and there we have neoliberalism. Now, neoliberalism on its face looks like it's democratic and because the term neoliberalism, by the way, the word neo is classical Greek. It means new, obviously. It means new liberalism, but it's not that at all. It's anti-democratic. It's anti-working class. At the core of neoliberalism, neoliberal totalitarian thinking is a class warfare. Even Warren Buffett, the American billionaire, has clearly stated without any problems. The man doesn't have an issue with this, to his credit. He has stated that it's not the workers that declared any war against us, the capitalists. We declared war on them, which is absolutely true. I mean, you're just telling the truth. Um, and we have had class warfare, capitalist class warfare, and this is why we have seen a rising gap between rich and poor in the last 45 years, rise in poverty, with the exception of China, by the way, where poverty was completely eliminated during extreme poverty during the reign of Xi Jinping, the current president. Um, Neoliberalism is a topic that is vast. It has many uh, dimensions. And I discuss it and I discuss the totalitarian influence of neoliberalism in a lengthy video. I invite all of you to watch it. I thank you. I ask you to ask questions, write in comments, and to subscribe to this channel, which Asad Alim manages. Thank you very much.